Welcome back to We Dream, a podcast from dream.org, a national nonprofit working to close prison doors and open doors of opportunity into the green economy. Together, we're building a future rooted in freedom, dignity, and opportunity for all. This season's all about reimagining a justice system that puts people over punishment, and we're also covering updates and analysis on the Trump administration's expected crime bill. I'm Naomi Garcia-Hector.
And I'm Janos Martin.
Today marks episode 7. We have a slight update regarding our podcast. It's just that we're going to be taking a mid-season break. Today we have an awesome conversation that's really relevant to our crime bill campaign that we've been running. We are going to go on this mid-season break while we wait to have more information about the crime bill, so to have actual bill language and be able to talk through what different provisions will mean. But we'll be back super soon with more relevant updates on the crime bill. Do you want to give a little bit of context to that, Janos?
Absolutely. I mean, we've been working off of rumors of what the crime will be for months now. And as you'll hear in my conversation later with our guest, we do have some clues about what will be in it. But again, it's been speculations. We thought it's good to take a little pause until we have some concrete legislative proposals to deal with. We also are recording this on February 17th. So we are 1 week from Donald Trump's State of the Union address. That, I think, will be pretty indicative of what direction the Trump administration is going to go on the issue of crime. Is he going to, as he sometimes has done on social media, take full credit for the reason that crime is down, even though crime has been declining for 3 years all across the country at the state and local level, regardless of federal policies? If he does that, maybe that makes it less likely that he'll push for an aggressive crime bill. Or will he do the opposite? Will he try to ratchet up fear as a tactic in advance of the midterm elections, as we've long suspected he might? We thought it was good to take a quick break and wait to see what comes next and then respond accordingly.
And who are we chatting with today?
We thought there was no more appropriate guest to close out the first half of this podcast season than Insha Rahman from the Vera Institute and Vera Action. Insha is somebody who's been well-known figure in the criminal justice space for the last decade. She was a public defender before getting involved in a number of important New York-related criminal justice efforts, and then expanded into the national space, where she's really been one of the cutting-edge thinkers about how criminal justice is not just a matter of policy, but a matter of messaging, and how can we communicate the story of a fairer, safer, and more just system in a way that resonates with voters, with elected officials, and can be used in elections to counter the politics of fear.
Great. Let's dive in.
All right, Insha, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Janos. Good to be here.
So we're going to be talking a lot about the crime bill and criminal justice today, but I like a good origin story. So you were at the Bronx Defenders. What led you down that path? And for those who don't know, Bronx Defenders, one of the best public defense organizations in the country. What led you there, and what did you learn there that you bring with you to this day?
Well, I grew up in a family where service mattered a lot. My parents are very religious, and we spent our weekends like cooking and feeding folks in our community. I sort of always knew I wanted to give back. My origin story of coming into criminal justice reform was actually in college, where the first time I ever stepped into a maximum facility prison, Greenhaven in upstate New York. It was sort of a college in prison program that I was a part of as a student at Vassar College. It was one of those moments where you see something that just strikes you and you can't look away. What was very clear to me was the human potential and talent that was sort of like wasting behind bars that most people, including myself, had never thought about until that moment. When I was in college, 9/11 also happened, which for me as a South Asian immigrant to this country, there's life for my family before 9/11 and after. It really gave me a political analysis about the way that this country and institutions treat some of us and not others. That's all sort of a long-winded way of telling you why I ended up at the Bronx Defenders in the Bronx, New York, which is one of the poorest congressional districts in the country. And the one sort of common trait for every single client that I represented, and I was there for over 5 years, represented thousands of people, is that they didn't have the money to afford a lawyer, and I was there as their court-appointed attorney. So I took that really seriously in terms of, like, if I am learning on the backs of poor people, I better give it my all. It's just an incredible experience. A lot of people get tired of being a public defender because there's truly a grind that is unlike most other jobs in the social justice realm. But the highs are very, very high and the lows are very, very low. And I would gladly do that job every day of my life because I think it was unbelievably rewarding to know very clearly what impact you were making on somebody's life, even if it's in the smallest, most incremental ways. But I left because there was this incredible opportunity back around 2015, which is right around when we first met, Janos. There a moment, an opportunity, a window for justice reform. So to fix the very real problems I saw in the courts every single day of like arrest and policing practices and why my clients were there for jumping the turnstile. And you're like, well, you don't have $2.50. You don't have money for the subway. That's why you're there, not because you committed a crime. And likewise, marijuana and theft of services and just all kinds of low-level things. And then the larger structural issues that led to people being arrested for much more serious things and the choices that they had made. It felt like there was an opportunity to work on police accountability, bail reform, reforming Rikers Island, closing it, all of these things that you and I have spent the last decade of our lives working on.
Well, thank you for your service with the Bronx Defenders, and shout out to all the public defenders out there. It is a really tough job, and I'm glad it taught you a lot, and it prepared you for certainly a long and successful run at Vera. That definitely appreciate you bringing the timeline up to when we met, the Close Rikers campaign. I always tell people that Insha was one of the folks that really educated me on the deep aspects of how our criminal legal system works. I mean, I worked as a civil rights lawyer, and I've worked on public defense cases. It is a messy, convoluted system. That's part of what the Close Rikers campaign was about. It was about shutting down a jail, but it was also about reforming a bunch of laws and reforming how the court system worked. It also had a component that I want you to talk about because it will lead us into the rest of our conversation about the crime bill, which is shifting the way the public understands how the system works. Vera Institute was helpful in bringing polling into the equation. I had never worked on an issue campaign that had polling before. I thought that was a nice treat just to have a snapshot of what people actually thought about what we were saying versus just the kind of street conversations and community conversations you have. Really, with Close Rikers, we were trying to get the city to understand that this is a human rights abomination, and we should not have it in our name, and we should have a better and fairer system. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect of the campaign, shifting the way that New Yorkers thought about Rikers and about jail system?
We can change all the laws we want. We can change all the policies we want. If we don't bring people along and change hearts and minds, both about the injustice that we are trying to correct and then the solutions, the opportunity that we are building towards, our wins won't be durable. We have seen that time and time again. I think that we are still sort of in the moment of building the narrative and building support for closing Rikers. We are not done yet. But Janos, you and I, like we first started talking right around when Khalif Browder committed suicide. That was a story that at that moment, many, many New Yorkers knew. Probably more New Yorkers knew or have heard of this young man who was locked up for 3 years at Rikers Island, insisted on his innocence, went to court 31 times. At the end of the day, he was found innocent. He was just released. There was no case against him. And yet the scars of being incarcerated, mostly in solitary confinement for 3 years for being beaten up by corrections officers, like living just in like abject terror. That was the story that animated certainly Chief Judge Lippman, who, you know, a storied judge of the New York State Court of Appeals, was like, I want to chair a commission to explore what we should do with Rikers Island. And the fact that it really sort of became not just for you and I as justice reformers and people who like care about civil rights and racial justice, but for people in the business community, in law firms, in neighborhoods around the city, where like, we cannot have this stain. I think that that was so powerful that we really owned a narrative in that moment about the injustice. What the polling told us, though, is people are indeed angry about an injustice, but they want to know that whatever the solution is to fix it doesn't come at the compromise of people's safety. And that's where we have needed to shift to, like in the intervening decade since the Close Rikers campaign started, to say we can shut that abomination on Rikers Island and we can build borough-based jails in the boroughs. But here's why that's actually going to be good for your community and good for public safety, not working against it. And like that's what polling and message testing and like having real conversations to understand how we change hearts and minds, not just change the laws and policies. It matters so deeply to every single advocacy campaign we do.
So let's zoom out now to national. You and I both came up doing things in New York and went our respective paths doing national work, and now we're working together more closely again.
Yes.
Over the years, I think we both learned a lot about the national conversation, how different states approach that balance of criminal justice and public safety. Can you share a little bit more about what you've learned about the narrative work and how you can get politicians to understand that it seems like the main default choices over the years have been to be, quote, tough on crime, which we know isn't necessarily even an accurate phrasing, or to duck the issue entirely. Really, what we've been trying to do is address that there is a different way to do public safety correctly and to talk about public safety. So can you just talk about some of the work you've done around the country on that?
Well, Janos, another campaign you and I worked on together was bail reform in New York. And for folks who aren't in New York who are listening, like even if you haven't been here, even if you don't work on bail reform, if you don't work on criminal justice reform, you have heard something about New York bail reform, and chances are it is not positive. When in fact, it was a law that when it got passed, it did exactly what bail reform should do. It took money and profit out of the equation. You have to put down money to pay for the price of their freedom. It reduced the number of people behind bars. It addressed some of the racial disparities that we see in bail setting and bail making in this country. Importantly, it protected public safety. But you wouldn't know that from the public narrative around bail reform. And that really inspired me in 2022 when we were going through several rounds of backlash and rollbacks to the law that we'd passed in 2019. I was like, we need not to deal with the policy, because we're actually right on the policy, but we need to tackle the politics of crime. Because every time fear-mongering about crime starts, literally all of the evidence, all of the policy, all of the reasoning just goes out the window. Here's what we found is there is the political debate of being tough or soft on crime, and then there's where everyday Americans are. And in our now more than 40 rounds of polling and public opinion research that we've done across the country, in battleground states, in places that are seen as very blue, like New York and California, and then places that are seen as very purple, like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Here's what we have found, is that where voters are is well ahead of where the political debate is. Voters believe we can have safety and justice. There's no false choice between one or the other, even though the political debate would make you feel like there is. There's a dynamic in the politics of crime, which is when election season comes up, Republicans go tough on crime. They attack Democrats for being quote unquote soft on crime. And Democrats do one of two things, as you said, which is to be silent and run away from the issue, or to say, no, I too am tough on crime and try to out-tough their opposition. The truth is voters don't believe either strategy works. Silence is not going to work because public safety is a kitchen table issue for voters, but they have heard and seen tough on crime for many years now, and they actually don't think it works either. So what we've developed is essentially an approach, which we call being serious about safety. It's a new paradigm for safety where it's both about real policies and real solutions that work to prevent crime and break its cycle. And we are seeing that in cities across the country where today, like, crime rates are the lowest they have been in literally decades. Like, we have made real progress. Yet we know there's more to do. And so actually owning safety head on, not ducking the issue, not resorting to old, tired rhetoric and policies that voters are like, we've tried that doesn't really work, or that actually feels like it's, in tension with my values around the harms that I've seen of this system. Like, we live in a country where 1 out of 2 people have either been in jail or prison themselves or experienced it through a loved one, where 70 million people have a criminal record and the consequences that brings. And yet half of Americans think I'm very worried about public safety and what we're doing doesn't work. All of that allows for an opening. We have watched many politicians that we have worked with step through that door and say, I'm serious about safety. We can have safety, accountability, and justice. I'm rejecting the tough on crime rhetoric and really sort of like stepping up to the plate.
That's great. We've both worked in bipartisan settings, nonpartisan settings, but for the purpose of this conversation, there is a bit of a partisan veneer to it, right? Because a Trump crime bill, we have to expect, would be, like all Trump policies, supported by the rank and file of his party. I guess the question then is, if you were sitting across from a Democrat in Congress right now, what does a serious about safety message mean in the context of a Trump crime bill?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is do not be fooled by a Trump crime bill actually being sincere in trying to address the valid public safety concerns that Americans have. Just don't fall for it. The second is whatever comes out in that crime bill Think about what we are seeing in this country and the authoritarian agenda that the Trump administration is advancing under the guise of crime control, sending the National Guard and federal agents into our cities, these mass ICE raids, weaponizing the justice system. You hate all of that? Of course you do. You're a Democrat. You find that to be offensive to the rule of law and to our norms. And you know what? Everyday American people hate that too. This crime bill will have more of that, and it'll literally just be, again, a way for Trump to further collect power and use crime as the wedge without being sincere about addressing our public safety needs. The third thing I'd say is, I know you can't just get up there and say, no, 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 no. You have to stand for something. And so here's a new paradigm for you, which is about safety, accountability, and justice. There are essentially 6 planks that Americans want their politicians, their elected leaders, to lean in on. The first is having strong, accountable policing. People believe there is a role for police, but they do not think they should do everything. They certainly don't want to see unaccountable policing. So focus on having the police on the most serious crimes, faster 911 response times, solving serious cases. And then look to what else do we need? Who else are the right first responders to the crises that people feel around public safety? And so it means address ending the overdose crisis with real community-based solutions that are harm reduction in approach. Americans support it deeply because so many of us have experienced addiction or the harms of addiction that have been left untreated. Address the mental health crisis, and this administration has cut billions in funding for school-based mental health and counseling. All of that has an impact on crime and public safety in our neighborhoods and in our families. The fourth is tackle gun violence. Gun violence is a real scourge. There are real solutions that work, community violence intervention programs, and really smart, targeted policing, going after gun traffickers. We have seen gun violence reduced by double digits in this country, and we've still got more work to do. The fifth, and I'd say this is really important for Democrats because they're often seen as really soft on this, is making sure that we have safe streets and a good quality of life. We should not be ceding quality of life to our opposition when we know that having potholes fixed and streetlights working and nice green lots and places for kids to play, a sense of community, actually is really good for public safety. And then finally, don't leave justice behind, because when we talk about justice and second chances and what it means to be a fairer, more equitable society, the American people are there with us. It's actually a very obvious, set of solutions.
It's a good list.
It's a really clear list. We just need members of Congress to say, I'm going to reject the old tough on crime rhetoric and policy that I've always been given, and I'm going to lean into a new approach. Here's why it's so important is the last time Democrats and Republicans did a big, ugly crime bill, 1994, Bill Clinton, and a lot of people are like, well, it worked then, but we are not there. We are in 2026, 30 years later. We've learned a lot since then about what works to prevent crime and break its cycle and what the harms are of unchecked mass incarcerations. That's why we know it's the moment for a new paradigm, a new approach.
And what I like about your list is that you're not saying that we need a bill with all 6 of these things that every single person has to sign on to. For some Democrats, leaning into some of those issues might be more resonant than others. But the point is, there is a menu that if we even fixed 2 of the things on that list as a country, then this would be a far safer place and a place where more people could thrive.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's right as a matter of policy and solutions. It's also actually right as a matter of politics. You can't really leave that behind when you are talking with members of Congress who, of course, are looking to their next election.
I think you've kind of made this case at the beginning of your last answer, but we see the energy across, directing now not to politicians, but to other advocacy organizations or just people, the rank and file who are standing up in the streets upset with this administration, whether you're talking about No Kings or the brave people of Minneapolis. How do you connect what's going on with the crime bill conversation to our broader fight to protect democracy? And how should people be thinking about how those 2 things are connected?
Well, I use this phrase a lot, so I'll just say it again and forgive me for being repetitive, but Trump is advancing his authoritarian agenda under the guise of crime control. Like every lever is the one of the criminal justice system, whether that's law enforcement or the courts or the threat of expanding incarceration. That is what we are seeing now. This is a democracy issue. It's not just a criminal justice reform issue or a public safety issue, and it's one that touches every single one of us. So how do you make that connection? I think we are in a moment where we are showing up for other people and showing up up for other causes because we feel it's part of our collective ability to survive, right? You are watching millions of people go out for No Kings marches. You're watching community members who may have never gone to a protest a day in their lives show up and do mutual aid for the immigrant neighbors who are worried to step outside because of ICE raids. We are in a moment where I think there's more of a collective sense of belonging and the need for survival. We should think about our issues in that way as well. We often tend to be, as folks in movement and advocates, this is what I work on. And in this moment, what we're working on is honestly saving our democracy and saving like the things that we know matter deeply to all of us. I do keep going back to safety and justice because those are two deeply, deeply important values to any one of us, no matter where we are in the political spectrum, where we live, what we think of this administration. We all fundamentally want a safer and more just country.
Well, let me close on that then, because this is such a immensely taxing defensive fight. When you talk about people being motivated almost by a sense of survival, how do we get through this 4-year term if things continue the way they are? Often, unfortunately, that is the case in criminal justice. We are going to bat to knock down a terrible proposal that some legislator or some executive is putting forward. At the same time, there are moments where we really do change the system. With bail reform, one of the left out stories is that there are now many thousands of people, fewer per year, who are incarcerated pre-trial, not taken away from their families and their jobs and their housing, and able to fight for their innocence from home with their lawyers. That is not the story that you hear often in the media about bail reform. With closing Rikers, it's going a lot slower than it's supposed to, but the city is on a path, however wobbly and inefficiently, to shut down the most notorious jail in America. I feel like the energy you felt when you walked into that prison for the first time, which is similar to the feeling I felt the first time I was in a jail cell. And I think for anybody, whether they've been incarcerated or a lawyer or an advocate inside jail or prison, we still have such a long way to go. What's sort of your North Star? What's your dream of when will you be able to kick back your feet a little bit and feel like this is what the vision that you want to see America come to as a fair, safer criminal justice system?
Wow. That is a big, heady question, and we don't have that much time. But here's a few markers of that, right? When people, no matter which neighborhood they live in, they feel safe to go outside. They feel like government attends to their problems, however big or small. If somebody has the misfortune of being involved in the criminal justice system, or they spend time behind bars, the most that they will lose is their liberty, which is a huge loss, but not their dignity, their humanity, their sense of safety, their sense of autonomy. We have a legal system right now that the only way we can justify its existence is by thinking that the people who go through it are less than. Fundamentally, we are in a fight not only for our democracy, but for our humanity. I think if humanity and people are at the center of every decision our government and our institutions make for us and what we make every day as people, that's when I think I can kick my heels up and move to, I don't know, Hawaii and live a different life. Not sure it's going to happen in our lifetimes, Janos, but I feel honestly more hopeful than not, even in this really hard moment that we're in.
Well, I appreciate that. And that's the great note to end on. So for anyone listening, please make sure to follow Insha and the work of Vera and Vera Action in the next few months as we tackle the crime bill and in the years ahead as we try to transform the criminal justice system together. Thank you so much for coming on the program, Insha.
Likewise, Janos, thanks for being such a great partner in crime.
Thanks for listening. As always, make sure you check the links in the description, continue to connect with today's guest on socials, and you can sign up to join our crime bill response team through the description as well. We'd love to have you and get you involved with our campaign and all the work that we're doing. We're recording this closing on February 17th, 2026. Don't forget that our Dream Justice cohort applications are still open. You can find more details on that in the description or at dream.org. That's all for now. Be safe, and remember, don't quit your daydream.